My name is David. 52 years old. Construction worker. Atlanta heat baked into my skin like regret that never cooled. My hands have held more weight than most men hold in a lifetime. Concrete, rebar, timber, silence. 10 years of lifting a family that was never truly mine. Eric was 17 now. My wife's boy. Her first husband's legacy. For a decade I'd been patching the holes Frank left behind. Emotional, financial, moral. One paycheck, one quiet concession at a time. Frank was one of those men who could disappear without guilt. He'd call sometimes, leave a voicemail that sounded like hope but cost nothing. "I'll come by soon," he'd say. "We'll do something, just the two of us." Then months would pass. Eric would sit by the window with that stupid mixture of faith and anger on his face, pretending not to care. When Frank finally did show up, he came armed with shiny distractions. Sneakers, a basketball, a leather wallet he couldn't afford. He'd pat Eric on the shoulder, grin like the sun was rising again, then vanish by the next weekend. Meanwhile, I paid for the school lunches, the dentist visits, the gas in the car, the insurance, the damn electricity that kept the lights on when Frank was out there chasing whatever ghost version of freedom men like him always chase. I told myself I didn't mind. That being steady was its own reward. That one day Eric would grow up and see the difference between love that stayed and love that left. I waited for that day like a man waiting for rain that never comes. You learn a lot about invisibility when you're a stepfather. You learn that silence becomes a kind of currency. You pay with it every time you swallow your pride. Every time the boy calls you David instead of Dad. Every time your wife's eyes flicker toward you, asking you not to make things worse. You nod. You keep quiet. You keep giving. You think patience will turn into belonging. It never does. The first signs came subtle. Small disrespect disguised as indifference. A thank you unsaid. A door left open after I'd asked him twice. A muttered joke under his breath that my wife pretended not to hear. Little things that rot the floorboards of a home. I'd catch him sometimes, rolling his eyes when I spoke, smirking when I gave advice. He had that teenage gift of knowing exactly how to wound you without a word. I told myself he was just a kid. That boys grow into respect the way trees grow into shade, slowly, painfully, maybe never. But it was my mistake, not his. I taught him the wrong lesson, that a man's forgiveness is infinite, that boundaries bend for love, that money buys peace. I made my own invisibility comfortable for him. Then came the theft. The betrayal that stripped the paint off every illusion I'd built. It was a Thursday evening. I'd just come home from a 12-hour shift pouring concrete on a site that smelled of dust and diesel. My back was *ling me, my hands cracked open from the cold. I wanted dinner, a shower, maybe a little silence before bed. Instead, I found an email from my bank, flagged transaction. Over $4,000 charged to a rental property in Florida. Luxury coastal villa, the description read. I thought it was a scam. A mistake. Then I saw the confirmation email, same address as Eric's school, same phone number. His name buried in the notes section. When I called him downstairs, he came slow, lazy, phone in hand, face unreadable. I showed him the charge, waited for confusion, fear, anything human. He just shrugged. Yeah, that was me. I felt the air leave the room. You used my bank account? You weren't using it. He said it like that, flat, defensive, like borrowing from me was as normal as asking for a ride. It's fraud, Eric. He rolled his eyes. It's just a rental. I'll pay it back. With what? He looked at me then, smirked a little, the corner of his mouth twitching with something that wasn't quite contempt but close. Relax. You've got the money? 4 words. Small. Casual. But they landed like a hammer in the soft part of my chest. You've got the money. That's all I'd ever been to him. Not a man. Not a father. Not even a figure to be feared. Just a living wallet that made his life work. A background noise of stability. I didn't yell. Couldn't. I just stood there looking at the boy I'd raised, realizing for the first time that he'd never seen me. Not really. I wasn't part of his story, I was the scaffolding that held it up while he played at being the son of a better man. When I told my wife, she froze. She said, "He's just a kid, David. He doesn't understand money." But he understood enough to steal it. I went to bed that night and lay awake beside her while she scrolled through her phone, pretending things were normal. The glow of her screen flickered across her face, indifferent light over indifferent eyes. I thought about how many times I'd covered for him, for her, for this entire illusion of a family that depended on my silence to survive. I thought about all the nights I came home exhausted, my clothes soaked with sweat and dust, only to hear laughter from the living room, the kind that stops when you walk in. The half-hearted hellos. The quiet that follows. Invisibility doesn't happen all at once. It's not a switch. It's a slow fading, a dimming of presence until even the sound of your voice becomes optional. That night, I stared at the ceiling and felt something go cold inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. The kind of quiet a man feels before he makes a decision he can't take back. At dawn, I went out to the garage. The air was cool, still, the light coming in thin through the blinds. I stood among my tools, saws, hammers, nails, all the honest things I could touch, unlike the lies I'd built a home on. There's a kind of clarity that comes to men like me only after too much has been lost. It doesn't shout. It whispers. I thought about Frank, that phantom father who could vanish for years and still be loved. I wondered what it felt like to be worshipped for absence while I was resented for presence. Maybe he had it figured out. Maybe vanishing was the only way to be seen. By breakfast, Eric was gone. Off to school, probably bragging about his trip to his friends, unaware that I'd already called the rental company, canceled the booking, and started the process to refund the money. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it out of principle. The same principle I'd buried for 10 years under compromise and exhaustion. My wife asked me later why I looked so quiet. I said I was just tired. She nodded, relieved it wasn't a fight. That's how deep the rot went. She feared conflict more than dishonesty. That evening, I watched Eric at dinner, talking, laughing, completely unaware that his luxury vacation had already turned to dust. The arrogance of youth, untested and unearned. I wanted to say something, to tell him that he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But I said nothing. Silence was the only language he'd ever taught me. I realized then that this house wasn't mine. My name might have been on the mortgage, but it belonged to them. The mother, the son, the ghost of the father who still haunted every word spoken under this roof. I was just the structure. The thing holding up the illusion that we were a family. That night, lying in bed again, I felt something shift. The warmth I used to feel when I thought of Eric, that faint echo of fatherhood, was gone. In its place was something hollow. A space where love had lived and been emptied. People talk about betrayal like it's a single act, a knife in the back. But it's not. It's a slow corrosion. A whisper that starts with "you're not my real dad," and ends with "you've got the money." That's the thing about invisibility. You don't notice it happening until one day you realize your absence would make no difference at all. And that's when I knew something had to break. I didn't explode. I didn't raise my voice or slam a single door. Anger would have made it look like he'd won. So instead, I went quiet, that deep, deliberate quiet that men use when words are useless. The morning after I discovered what Eric had done, I woke before sunrise. The house was still, the kind of stillness that hides shame under comfort. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, watching the steam fade into nothing. That seemed appropriate. 10 years of effort dissolving into the same air. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. One by one, I canceled his privileges, the debit card, the automatic transfers, the small luxuries he never thanked me for. I shut off the phone line I'd been paying for since he was 12. Then the streaming services, the gas card, the gym membership he rarely used. It wasn't spite. It was surgery. Cutting away the dead parts before they poisoned the rest. By the time the sun rose, the silence felt clean. I hadn't said a word, but every click was a sentence. Every confirmation was a verdict. At 7, my wife came down the stairs, robe tied loose, hair unbrushed. She looked at me with the kind of softness that people mistake for love but is really habit. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. Thinking about yesterday?" I nodded. She sighed, poured coffee, and said, "He's young. He'll learn." He will, I thought. Just not the way she expects. When she left for work, I printed out a list, every expense I'd ever covered for Frank's son. 10 years of receipts turned into proof of how deeply I'd buried myself. School trips, medical bills, camps, tutors, birthdays, vacations. I even listed the interest from loans I'd taken to make those things happen. At the bottom, I added one more line in black ink. Attempted fraud with stolen banking information. Then I folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to Frank. It wasn't revenge. It was responsibility being returned to its rightful owner. For years, I had carried another man's failure on my shoulders, pretending it was love. Now it was time to let him feel the weight of what he'd abandoned. I mailed the letter before work. The post office clerk didn't even look up. Just stamped it and slid it into the pile. One small sound, that thump, and a decade of resentment began its long journey back to where it came from. Eric came home that afternoon grinning, all teenage arrogance and borrowed confidence. He still believed his little heist had gone unnoticed. "Guess what?" he said. "The guys are in. We're leaving Friday." I looked up from the newspaper. Leaving for where? He blinked. The beach house. Florida. I told you. I nodded slowly. Right. He didn't catch the tone. Why would he? To him I was background noise, a man-shaped ATM. For 2 days I let him live inside that delusion. Watched him boast to his friends on speakerphone, brag about the place, about how he booked it. My wife heard it too, but she said nothing. Maybe silence had become our family language. Thursday evening he strutted into the kitchen, sunglasses on his head, luggage by the door. Don't wait up, he said with a smirk. We'll be gone a week. I stirred my coffee. You should check your phone before you go. He frowned, pulled it from his pocket. The screen lit up with a notification. Payment failed, reservation canceled. Another alert followed. Account suspended. Then another. Phone service disconnected. I watched his face collapse in slow motion. The smirk wilted, confusion twisting into fear. What the hell? He muttered. Something's wrong with the bank. I nodded. Yes, something's wrong. He looked at me, realization dawning too late. You canceled it? I corrected it, I said. He stared, eyes wide with disbelief. You can't just. I can, I said quietly. And I did. He stood there shaking his head, mouth opening and closing like a fish caught on dry land. My wife came in halfway through, saw his expression and turned to me. David, what did you do? What I should have done years ago, I said. I stopped paying for someone who thinks I'm nothing. Her lips parted, ready for defense, for diplomacy. He made a mistake. No, I cut in. He made a choice. There's a difference. Eric stormed off, shouting that I was insane, that I'd ruined everything. The front door slammed, rattling the glass. She turned back to me, tears pooling fast. You humiliated him. No, I said. He humiliated himself. I just made sure the world could see it. That night the phone started ringing. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs. Then a message, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Frank. What the hell, man? He barked. I got some letter from you with a list like you're sending me a bill. You trying to start something? I listened in silence, letting him shout himself hoarse. When he ran out of air I said, just thought you should know what raising your son costs. He scoffed. You chose to do all that. Don't put that on me. I did, I said. And now I'm choosing to stop. He laughed, that empty kind of laugh that comes from men who think consequences are myths. You can't just dump him on me. Watch me, I said and hung up. By morning the storm had reached Eric. 2 police officers knocked on the door while he was eating cereal. They weren't there to arrest him, just to confirm the fraud report tied to his name. A routine inquiry they called it. But routine doesn't stop a 17-year-old from going pale in front of his friends on FaceTime. He looked at me then, not angry, not defiant, just shocked that the world finally had edges. You called the cops? I met his eyes. No. The bank did. He wanted to argue, to scream, but all he could manage was, you're sick. Maybe, I said. But I'm not invisible anymore. That day spread through his school like fire. By lunch everyone knew. The boy who bragged about his beach house had it repossessed by reality. The thief who mocked his stepfather for working too hard had been exposed as the kind of kid who steals from the only man who stayed. Frank called again that night, furious, cornered by responsibility. You had no right dragging me into this. I had every right, I said. You're his father. I'm not paying for your drama. It's not mine, I said, voice low. It's yours. Always was. He cursed, threatened, begged, the usual arc of weak men. I let him finish before saying, welcome back to fatherhood, and hanging up. For years I'd been the safety net under their lives. That morning I cut it and they fell into the reality they'd built. My wife spent the next 2 days trying to glue the silence back together. She said it was temporary, that Eric just needed time to process. But I'd processed for a decade. My patience had already turned to stone. I watched her pacing the kitchen, phone in hand, whispering to Frank, probably begging him to fix what he'd broken. The sound didn't even make me angry anymore. It just sounded like someone sweeping ashes. By the weekend Eric's friends had moved on. Teenagers forget fast, but humiliation lingers. He stayed in his room, quiet for once, the glow of his phone dim behind the door. I didn't go to him. I didn't offer comfort. That part of me, the part that forgave, had died the moment he said, you've got the money. Sunday morning I went to the garage again, stood among the tools and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. The kind of awake that comes after years of sleepwalking through sacrifice. For 10 years I had built a family out of duty, love, and lies. Now all that was left was truth, harsh, clean, merciless truth. And sometimes truth is the only justice left for a man who's done being used. The sound of sirens used to mean someone else's problem. That morning they were mine. Or rather, his. It wasn't an arrest, not really, just a visit. A follow-up. But to a 17-year-old boy streaming his life to the internet, even a knock from the police becomes theater. And Eric was still performing. He had been live streaming when they arrived. His friends watching. Dozens of faces blinking from his phone screen. He opened the door with a laugh that turned brittle when he saw the uniforms. Yeah, he said, voice rising at the edges. The officers asked for him by name. Asked if he knew anything about unauthorized transactions. His face drained. He stammered something about a mistake. The live chat lit up with messages. Bro, WTF, yo, you in trouble, is that real police? I stood at the bottom of the stairs, unseen, listening to the sound of reality cracking. He called for me once, David. But I didn't move. I wanted him to hear his own name echo in that silence. The officers didn't handcuff him. They took notes, left a card, and drove away. But the damage was done. The video spread before noon, a viral humiliation, the kind of wound that festers in every hallway and group chat. By evening, his laughter was gone. He came downstairs pale, trembling, muttering that everyone at school had seen it. My wife tried to comfort him, but her words were useless. You can't smooth over shame. It's not dirt you can wipe off. He looked at me, eyes red. You did this, he whispered. I didn't answer. You ruined my life, he shouted, slamming his fist against the counter. I wanted to tell him he'd ruined it himself. That life isn't a gift you're given, it's a bill you pay. But I said nothing. The truth had already spoken for me. That night, he locked himself in his room. My wife cried quietly on the couch, whispering that I'd gone too far. I sat opposite her, hands folded, and said, for the first time in years, I didn't go far enough. Frank called the next morning. He was angry, the kind of anger that comes from inconvenience, not conscience. You think humiliating him fixes anything? I didn't humiliate him, I said. He did that all on his own. You sent me that letter, you dragged my name into it. Your name was already there, I interrupted. You just stopped answering when it was time to pay. He started shouting again, his voice cracking under the weight of accountability. You can't expect me to pick up where you left off. That's exactly what I expect, I said. You can have the title and the bill. He hung up. I let the silence settle like dust. For days the house felt heavier. My wife avoided me. Eric stayed locked away, his door closed like a barricade. I didn't try to break it. Sometimes you have to let the walls fall on their own. On the third night I came home late. The house was dim. Dishes in the sink, half-eaten food on the counter, the kind of quiet that smells like decay. My wife was sitting in the dark, face lit by the glow of her phone. You happy? She asked. No, I said. But I'm honest. You could have talked to him. I tried for 10 years. She shook her head. He's a kid. You should have protected him. I did. From everything except consequence. Her eyes filled. You wanted to break him. No, I said. I wanted to show him he wasn't untouchable. She stood, trembling, her voice cracking between rage and fear. You think you're teaching him a lesson? You're just proving you're cruel. Maybe cruelty is the only language he understands. She left the room. The slam of the door was an answer I didn't need. The days that followed blurred together, work, silence, meals eaten separately. But beneath it all, something had shifted. The air in the house was thinner, cleaner. No more entitled laughter echoing down the hall. No more smugness at the dinner table. Just the cold symmetry of consequences settling into place. Then a week later Frank showed up. He didn't knock. He just walked in like a man entering his own mess. He looked older, thinner, a little desperate. His eyes darted around the living room like he was seeing a crime scene. What the hell did you do to him? He said. What I should have done years ago, I replied. You sent the cops to my son. No, I said. The bank did. Actions have trails. They followed his. He jabbed a finger at me. You had a choice. You could have handled this privately. I did. For a decade. He glared, jaw tightening. You're pathetic. You think this makes you a man? No, I said quietly. It makes me done. He didn't expect that. His mouth opened, then closed again. My wife appeared in the hallway, pale and shaking. Frank, please? He turned on her. You let him do this? Her silence was the only answer. Fine, he said finally, grabbing his jacket. You want me to be the father? I'll be the father. Good, I said. Start with the overdue bills. He left then, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. After that, things moved fast. The school called about disciplinary hearings, citing the fraud. Frank was forced to appear, sign papers, pay restitution. His name went on documents again, where it always should have been. Eric avoided me completely. I'd see flashes of him in the hallway, gaunt, tired, deflated. His confidence had turned to ash. The boy who once mocked me for working too hard now couldn't face the world without shame. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. Just empty. One night, I came home and found him sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands. My wife was upstairs. The house was silent except for the ticking clock. He didn't look up when I entered. They all saw it, he said softly. Everyone. I didn't answer. I can't go back there. You'll have to. He nodded slowly, then looked up, eyes red-rimmed. You hate me, don't you? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to hurt him with honesty. But I saw something fragile in his face, the boy he might have been if someone had taught him respect sooner. No, I said finally. I hate what I let you become. He swallowed hard, blinked fast, then whispered, I'm sorry. It sounded real, but I'd learned not to trust sound. Regret often mimics sincerity. Still, I nodded once. Good. Then start fixing what you broke. He didn't reply. Just sat there, small for the first time in years. That night, I didn't sleep again. The guilt came crawling back, quiet and patient. The part of me that still wanted to protect him fought with the part that knew protection had become poison. The next morning, Frank called one last time. His voice was flat, exhausted. I paid the fines, he said. He's off the hook. Good, I said. You got what you wanted. No, I said. He did. He was silent for a while. Then, grudgingly, you're right about one thing, he needed to learn what it costs to screw up. I wasn't teaching him that, I said. I was teaching him what it costs to disrespect the man who saves you. He exhaled sharply. Guess we both failed him. Maybe, I said. But only one of us tried. He hung up. After that, things quieted down. The house settled into a strange peace, brittle, tentative, fragile. Eric stopped shouting. My wife stopped defending. And me, I stopped hoping. Hope, I'd learned, is just the longest form of denial. Still, there were moments. Small ones. A thank you muttered when I passed the salt. A nod when I handed him the car keys to drive himself to his part-time job, the one he got to help pay restitution. Each gesture was a fracture of something bigger, something almost human. But the balance had shifted for good. I was no longer the invisible provider. I was the man they feared to disappoint. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had to destroy the illusion of family just to be seen as part of it. And in that ruin I found something close to peace. Cold, quiet, and completely mine. Days moved like old trucks, slow, noisy, stubborn. The house stopped pretending to be a home and settled into something simpler. 4 walls, 3 people, and the inventory of everything we had broken. Eric came down to breakfast without the armor he used to wear. No sunglasses on his head. No phone between us like a shield. He stood by the counter, hands in his pockets, and cleared his throat the way a boy does right before trying to become a man. I'm sorry, he said. 2 words. Small. The kind that bounce off you when you've heard every version of them before. But these didn't bounce. They landed and stayed. For what? I asked. He swallowed. For taking your money. For lying about it. For treating you like. His voice failed. He stared at the table, found the rest, and forced it out. Like you didn't matter. I let the silence stand up and walk around us. I'd spent 10 years filling silences with explanations. Now I let one explain me. I appreciate the words, I said finally. But I'm finished being the lesson you only learn when something hurts. He nodded. I get that. No, I said. You understand the consequences. I want you to understand the cost. His eyes met mine and didn't run. Tell me. So I did. I told him what steadiness costs, the overtime hours stacked like bricks, the vacations I didn't take, the boots I resold instead of replaced, the way respect gets cheaper every time you buy it for someone else. I told him about the nights I lay awake in the next room while he laughed at me with friends who didn't know my name, only my password. I told him about the letter I sent to Frank and how the envelope felt heavier than the whole house. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just listened like a person who finally knows he might be wrong. Can I fix it? He asked. You can't fix what you broke, I said. You can build something next to it and live there. He took a breath that sounded like work. Okay. That was the first day he went looking for a job. Not the kind of job a kid brags about, not something with a branded hat and a discount on sneakers. He took what he could get, evening shifts at a warehouse, unloading trucks for people who didn't care about his name, only his hands. He came home sore and dirty, with a new quiet in him that didn't ask for applause. A week later he slid his first pay stub across the table like a confession. For the bills, he said. It's not much. It's not nothing, I said. That's what matters. He started showing up in places he'd avoided. The sink, the garage, the grocery aisle where the cheap detergent sits on the bottom shelf. He asked how to budget, then listened to the answer. He took notes. Real ones. Ink sinking into paper like something permanent. Respect didn't arrive like rain. It arrived like drought relief, slow, calculated, rationed through a plastic spigot you turn carefully because you're afraid it will stop. He said thank you without sounding like he was reading it off a cue card. He knocked before he entered my office. He stopped using my first name like a we *p***n. Sometimes he didn't use any name at all. He just stood there with his hands open, waiting for instruction the way a man waits at the edge of a foundation, ready to carry the first load. My wife watched all this with eyes that never learned how to hold guilt. She was kind in the way people are kind when kindness costs them nothing. She cooked more. She asked fewer questions that began with please and ended with later. But her silence from before lived in the kitchen like a stain you can't scrub out. I could still hear every moment she let me face alone. One evening when the light went soft and honest, my phone chimed. A message from Frank. Short. Bare. The skeleton of a man's admission. Covered his fine. Helped with a few bills. I'm tapped. Didn't know small stuff could drain you like this. I didn't answer. I turned the screen and slid the message across the table to Eric. He read it twice, jaw tight, then handed the phone back. No comment. Just the kind of quiet that tells you a truth finally hit its mark. It was never small, I said. He nodded. I know. He kept working. He stopped boasting. He failed and tried again. Once, he called me from the warehouse parking lot because his car wouldn't start. The old version of him would have demanded rescue. This one asked for guidance. It was raining hard enough to flatten the world. I drove out anyway, not because I wanted to be a hero but because a man can carry a boundary and a jack in the same truck. We got the car to cough itself awake. Back at the house, he stood under the porch light and said, "Thank you." It sounded like a first brick laid straight. He began to replace the easy lies with difficult truths. When his friends asked why he couldn't go out, he told them he had shifts to cover and hours to make. When a teacher pulled him aside about the video, he owned it. When Frank called with another empty promise to make a weekend special, he said, "Not this time," and hung up before the sweetness turned into rot. There were still fractures. There always are. He slipped once, bought a pair of shoes the price of a week's groceries and hid them under his bed like contraband. I found the box while looking for a wrench I'd loaned him and never got back. I didn't shout. I placed the receipt on his pillow with a note. You can keep the shoes or your progress. Pick one. He returned them before dinner and washed the dishes like a man paying interest. Months moved. Summer burned down to bone. He kept showing up. Not perfect, present. The difference between him and the boy from before wasn't a miracle. It was the math of consequence. Then came the night he asked me to meet his girlfriend's parents. I almost said no. Those rooms are rigged with ghosts. The introductions, the careful phrases, the way a man like me waits to see which chair is his and which is ceremonial. But we went. A small house that smelled like lemon oil and laundry. He shook hands with her father, then stepped aside and said, without looking at me for approval, "This is my father." The word didn't heal anything. It didn't have that power. But it didn't lie either. It just stood there between us, simple and earned. I nodded once. I didn't touch it. I didn't trust it. I accepted it the way you accept shade on a job site. Useful, temporary, not a promise. My wife cried when I told her. Relief mostly. Something in her believed the label meant we were repaired. I didn't correct her. Not because I wanted to protect a fantasy, but because some truths don't need to be spoken twice to remain true. Later that week, Eric handed me an envelope. Inside was a printed budget. His income, his expenses, a line marked repayment with my name next to it. The number was small enough to insult the debt and large enough to honor the effort. I signed my initials where he'd left space, not as a creditor but as a witness. We didn't go back to the old setup. I didn't reopen accounts. I didn't add him to plans. He bought his own phone with a cracked screen he apologized to no one for. He learned the price of habits and the difference between want and need. He kept paying. I kept stepping back. We both learned how to live inside the outline of respect. And then, because life likes symmetry, Frank sent one more message. Not angry this time. Not defensive. Just 7 words that sounded like a man finally looking in a mirror. I wasn't there when it mattered. Sorry. I didn't forward that one. I kept it. Not as proof, but as a reminder that apologies are not bridges, they're signs pointing at water. One night, long after the warehouse lights went out, Eric asked me if I ever regretted calling the bank, letting the world in, letting the shame do the work I couldn't. I regret waiting 10 years, I said. He nodded, eyes steady. I would have hated you sooner. Maybe, I said. But you would have met yourself sooner too. He looked away and laughed once, not cruel, not bitter. Just a sound a man makes when he finds out gravity was always there. I don't believe in redemption like movies sell it. People change because costs rise, not because music swells. Eric didn't become a saint. I didn't become a hero. We became something narrower and truer, 2 men under the same roof who finally understood the invoice between them. I'm not his jailer or his savior. I'm the man who stayed long enough to leave the right way. I'm the boundary that didn't fold. I'm the proof that love without respect turns any house into a job site, and the day you stop paying for contempt is the day construction ends. He thanks me more now. He shakes my hand sometimes, an awkward habit that makes him look older than the mirror says. We don't say I love you. We say I'll be there at 6 and text when you arrive. We trade small sure things instead of big fragile ones. It's not warm. Solid. I can live with solid. Some nights I walk through the garage and look at the shelves I built out of leftover lumber, lines true, corners square. I think about all the balance I tried to build in this family with money and silence, and how none of it held until I let the whole thing lean hard enough to reveal where it would break. Was I cruel? Maybe. Was I necessary? Absolutely. If a boy learns that the man who stays will always pay, he never learns what staying costs. If a woman learns she can keep the peace by spending another man's spine, she never learns what silence steals. If a father learns he can vanish and still be loved, he never learns to show up. So I ask you, and I ask myself every time the doubt creeps in like cold through a cracked window, when a man has carried a house on his back for a decade and the people inside refuse to see him, is it wrong to set the house down and let them feel the ground? Would you have kept paying, kept begging, kept vanishing inside your own life? Or would you have done what I did, and finally made them choose what and who they really respect?